They burned my house down and called the cops on me. Imagine that. I'm standing there choking on smoke, watching the place my grandfather built with his own hands collapse into a pile of blackened ash. And here comes this woman, Helen Clark, swaggering up like she's running a board meeting at my own funeral. She looked me right in the eye and without even a hint of shame said, "Non-compliance has consequences even for you," like she was reading a headline off the front page or trying to teach me some twisted lesson while my life was literally still burning behind her. And then there's the cops flipping through her folder that's thicker than a church Bible while I'm still covered in soot, trying to convince them I didn't set my own house on fire. What would you have done? Maybe I should have laughed, but I was too busy holding myself together. The smell of wet ash still clung to my clothes when Helen knocked on my hotel room door at 5 in the morning, clipboard in one hand, manila folder in the other, dressed like she was headed to a stockholder meeting, not the room of a man who'd just lost everything. I'd been up all night staring at old photos of what used to be my grandfather's fishing cabin, so the knock didn't even surprise me. But seeing her there, no sympathy, no humanity, just that glint of opportunity in her eyes, like she was about to pitch me a timeshare instead of deliver bad news. She introduced herself as the HOA president and launched straight into her presentation, flipping through papers, pointing out property maintenance violations, never once pausing to acknowledge that the place she was talking about didn't even exist anymore. Let me back up a sec because this part's important. Helen didn't just show up with a folder, she showed up with my file, one thick enough to use as a doorstop, full of notices I'd never received, all stamped with official-looking seals and intimidating numbers. Stuff like grass height, mailbox positioning, written in the kind of language that makes your heart race, even if you've done nothing wrong. Non-compliance has consequences, she repeated in that cold tone I remembered from my college days when bill collectors would call at dinner time. She rattled off procedures talking about protecting property values like my family's home was just a number on her spreadsheet. And then Mrs. Patterson from across the street wandered over, clutching a mug, and dropped a little bomb. Turns out Helen used to work for a collections agency, the kind that specializes in property seizures, foreclosure acceleration, targeting folks who miss a payment or trip over some tricky deed restriction. That explained the folder, the threatening language, her confidence, but it didn't explain how she knew the exact details of my mortgage, my insurance, even my banking activity, things no HOA should ever have. So there she was stamping forms in the ashes of my family's lake house, snapping photos for her so-called compliance monitoring records, and calling the police station right in front of me, claiming I set the fire myself to dodge some bogus foreclosure proceeding she'd cooked up apparently without my consent or any real legal authority. The responding officer, honestly, he seemed baffled. "Ma'am, this seems like a lot of paperwork for a house fire," he said, flipping through her violation notices and financial printouts like he was dealing with a real criminal case. But Helen just kept quoting HOA covenants, legal precedents, statute numbers, stuff that sounds official but carries no weight in real law. The cops clarified it. Right then she had zero authority to initiate any foreclosure, which didn't seem to surprise anyone except Helen. I stood there, suit covered in soot, heart pounding, watching her argue with the cops about her imaginary powers, realizing she'd been running this intimidation scheme on neighbors who didn't know their rights. She measured my foundation with a surveyor's tape on the charred slab, filling out forms like she was performing open-heart surgery on a ghost. She acted like she was government, but all she had was a costume and some threats. But what made my blood run cold was how prepared she was. How she had months of financial intelligence on me. By the time she packed up and left, I realized this wasn't neighbor drama, it was a heist. I started thinking, if she had all this on me, maybe I wasn't the first target. So the next morning I drove to the bank. Peterson, the manager, looked at me like I'd handed him a snake when I explained what happened. He pulled my file 2 inches thick, and inside was a mountain of paperwork Helen had submitted, including forged power of attorney documents that almost gave her full access to my accounts. She'd faked signatures, added notary seals, and written legalese that nearly fooled them into freezing my assets just because she called it HOA compliance. Peterson was shaking. Turns out Helen had pulled this stunt on 3 other lakefront homeowners in the last 18 months, all minority families, all people who bought in the premium sections. She'd used skip tracing tactics, stuff debt collectors do to find your car, not stuff a neighbor should ever get away with. Her scam fake paperwork, fraudulent notary stamps, detailed background checks, all so she could legally steal property by driving families out. The kicker, I found surveillance cameras hidden in the trees around my burned-out lot, wired up camouflage, not your standard ring cam from Home Depot, but professional-grade gear. And who's out there fussing with them when I show up? Grant Clark, teenager Helen's shadow. He claims it's for community security, but the wires ran everywhere, watching every move my family made for months. And then Lucas Reed, our HOA treasurer, shows up pale as a sheet. He pulls me aside, whispering, "Helen uses Grant to monitor families. She keeps files when people leave home, when they get deliveries, who visits, even vulnerability ratings on each family. She turned Grant into her spy, had him running intelligence for a harassment campaign." Lucas confessed Helen convinced him to keep resistance files documenting how hard it would be to push each family out. But the twist, Helen wasn't just a bully. She was orchestrating an organized crime operation. She forged mortgage applications, filed fake tax forms, claimed my dead grandfather's cabin was a rental, and sent fraudulent 1099s to the IRS. Next thing I know, I'm holding an audit letter accused of running an illegal rental business. I challenged it, citing due process and civil rights laws because her so-called evidence was nothing but fabricated paperwork and anonymous tips. Agent Morrison at the IRS took one look and suspended the audit, flagging Helen's reports for targeted demographic discrimination. Turns out every family Helen went after shared something in common. We didn't look like the folks who'd originally built this lakeside community. Word spread, families pulling violation flyers from their mailboxes, realizing they all got the same threats, same fake paperwork. Eva Brooks, a fire marshal, confirmed the arson at my cabin had been done with accelerants to destroy evidence and maximize damage, same as 2 other fires that happened to families on Helen's list. The more I dug, the uglier it got. Helen had mailed fraudulent mortgage apps across state lines, triggering federal jurisdiction. Anonymous threats started coming, targeting my federal prosecutor job, my security clearance. Someone knew everything about me, my family, my career. Clearly, Helen's operation was bigger than just a neighborhood power trip. Friday morning, the federal banking examiner called. Agent Richardson said, "We need to meet." That meeting changed everything. The feds had pieced it all together: mortgage fraud, identity theft, hate crime, conspiracy. Lucas finally broke down and confessed Helen's arrangement. She promised him a cut of every forced sale, coached him through paperwork, convinced him it was legal HOA enforcement when it was actually organized property theft. The FBI, IRS, Civil Rights Division, they all got involved. The pattern was undeniable. Helen targeted minority homeowners in prime locations, used fraud and intimidation, committed arson, and covered it up with a mess of fake compliance paperwork. The evidence, it was all there. Her own files. All the junk she'd shoved in my face after the fire became the noose that hanged her. And then came the day the community center packed Helen at the podium, showing off charts and before and after photos, bragging about restoring character to the neighborhood. The feds walked in, warrants in hand, backup at the exits. Agent Williams read the charges: federal civil rights conspiracy, systematic financial harassment, banking fraud, arson. Helen's face just fell apart. She realized right then all her paperwork had built the federal case that ended her career, her freedom, and her little empire. The community erupted, folks tearing down her flyers, hugging, crying, filming it all for social media. The government restored every illegally seized property, wiped out all her bogus liens, paid out compensation for the hell she put us through. My family's dock was rebuilt, the lake open to everyone, the new sign reading "Equal Access Protected by Federal Law." And me, I stood on that dock, holding my grandfather's old citizenship papers, thinking how his fight for civil rights in the 60s protected our family again all these years later. The same laws Helen thought she could twist ended up being her undoing. It's funny, isn't it? When you weaponize rules to hurt people, you end up writing your own indictment. So what would you have done? Would you have fought or walked away? If you've ever been targeted by someone hiding behind a title or fake authority, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below, share your thoughts about what justice means, and if you want to support more stories like this, just hit that thanks button. And hey, keep your paperwork tight, your neighbors close, and your fire far away from anyone who thinks rules are weapons.